This is Brandon Jones with Pact Publishing. In this section, we're going to take a look at how to use Android components. We're going to discover what intents are in this first video. Then we'll look at an example of invoking the camera and invoking the image gallery with an intent. Then we'll look at broadcast receivers. Then we'll take a look at an example of a broadcast receiver to theoretically upload high scores. Then we'll look at changing colors on a UI element and an example where we implement a color change on UI elements. So the first video, intents. We'll say, what is an intent? We'll describe that. Then we'll describe the difference between an explicit intent versus an implicit intent. We'll consider how they can be used in broadcast receivers, and we'll take a look at a few examples. We won't do any hands-on until the next video, but this video will give us a good overview of what intents are. So first of all, what is an intent? An intent is something that triggers something else to happen. A trigger behavior based on the device's state itself. Is it plugged in charging? Is it on Wi-Fi, for example? An intent can open a new screen, and one of the most powerful things that an intent can do is access something else that's already on the Android device, like the camera. So whenever possible, our goal is to reuse something that has already been written in our application. So in other words, we want to reuse libraries that already exist instead of create them new. That means we can do a lot more with a lot less code base, and that means we have a lot less code we have to test. Therefore, we have a higher quality application for the time that we put into testing. So some examples of intents I have here on the right. Plugged in and Wi-Fi can trigger a broadcast receiver. So sometimes if you have, say, a Bluetooth-enabled vehicle and you notice that as soon as you get in and start your vehicle, the music starts to play in your vehicle, that's because there's a broadcast receiver on your device that's listening for that Bluetooth connection. Just like plugged in and Wi-Fi, Bluetooth is another thing that a broadcast receiver can listen to. Now, if we want to use the camera, we can fire an intent, what we'll call an implicit intent, with a simple flag, action image capture, and that means that we want to toggle the camera. If we want to invoke another activity or another screen within our application, oftentimes we'll use an explicit intent, and we will explicitly say we want to call another activity, which in this case I'm calling otherActivity.class. So each of these three things can be fired by an intent. Explicit versus implicit intents. In an explicit intent, you're saying explicitly what you want to do. You're giving it a specific class. This is usually used to change screens within your app, because each screen is rendered by an activity, and the activity says what layout it wants to use. Because this is inside your app, we'll typically explicitly say which activity we wish to go to. Now, on the other hand, we might want to use an app or some kind of library that lives on the Android device but is outside of your application that you're writing. In that case, we use an implicit intent, which is where we say what we want to do, but not how to do it. And then we'll let the Android operating system or the user define the way to do it. So an example is, I want to take a picture, then we'll toggle the camera. Or I want to pick an image, then the image gallery will come up and we can pick an image based on that. So think a lot about implicit intents and how you can use them in your app, because instead of building from the ground up, implicit intents allow you to reuse what already exists without reinventing the wheel. Broadcast receiver. This is one of the most powerful parts of Android, if you ask a lot of Android developers, because this is a behavior that occurs when an external event happens. So you connect or disconnect to Wi-Fi. You can have something happen based on that behavior. You're plugged in charging, or the battery's full, or the battery's not full, the battery's getting low. You can have different behavior get targeted based on that. Connected or disconnected to Bluetooth, we gave that example earlier. Each of these things creates a stimulus in your app, and then you can react to that stimulus. What's nice is that you can react to the stimulus without user input. So think about that, because on our apps, we want to declutter the user interface as much as possible. In other words, every component that we put on a page must have a very well-defined function. If it does not, or if it can be replaced, let's take it off. In the very first app that I wrote, I had a very cluttered UI, and one of the things I had on that user interface is an upload button. And the idea is you would press this button and it would synchronize GPS locations with the planplaces.com website. I found I usually press this upload button when I plugged in my phone and put it on Wi-Fi. Once I did those two, I'd hit the upload button. But why do I need a button then? Because the phone knows when it's on Wi-Fi and plugged in charging. So that's a good case for a broadcast receiver. Listen to these things and do an upload when these things occur. Then we can entirely remove that upload button from the user interface and end up with a much simpler interface. Some example intents that we can take a look at. We can trigger the camera with only 2 lines and 1 overridden function. Remember those from an earlier video when we were taking a look at async task and how to override a function there? And so we are going to do this in our next video. The function we are overriding is what we're going to call a callback, because this function gets invoked automatically when the camera returns, when the user has either taken a picture or decided not to take a picture. So these are the 2 lines that we require just to invoke the camera. We are using this implicit intent where we say we want to capture an image. Now that line looks more complicated than it really is because all this line represents is a string that says I want to capture an image. It's just the way we're accessing that string through a constant called action image capture on a variable or on a type called media store. It looks more confusing than it is, but that is an implicit intent. So we start with that, and then we tell it that we want to start this camera as an external service, and then the camera is going to appear when the user takes a photo and accepts that photo. Then this method called onActivityResult is going to get invoked in our activity, and it's going to say, hey, I've heard back from the user, and here's that picture.